All right, guys, welcome to the latest episode of Muscle Owl Talks. So we're here today on International Women's Day, a day where we think about women everywhere in all facets. And we thought on Muscle Owl, why don't we do an episode about women and disability? I don't know. Zoe, do you want to bring us in?
Yeah, sure. What I think is interesting about women and disability, and you can say the same for any kind of other sort of minority characteristic and a woman, is that I think we have a unique experience of what it is like to be female that is different from if you were able-bodied and a woman. And people talk a lot about intersectionality, and they talk a lot about, it's a buzzword, but it's about making sure that the sort of the feminist movement and the movement for women's equality captures those differences within the feminist movement. So it's about, these experiences that women have. Are they had by all women? Are they had by certain groups of women? What might be different if you belong to different minority groups? And women with disabilities, I think, is a very clear example of where we don't always have the same kind of shared experiences of inequality and of discrimination that you might do if you were an able-bodied woman. I think a really good example of this is the everyday sexism movement. So you may be aware that it's a hashtag everyday sexism that was set up a few years ago, where women kind of tweet their experiences of very small but sort of very clear acts of sexism that they experience just on a day-to-day basis, on their way to work, at home, out on the street. And I always found those interesting because I would read them and then sort of sit there and go, no, this isn't something that I've ever experienced. This isn't something I'm familiar with. I'm aware it happens. My friends report it happening to them. I see it in the media, but it's something that never happens to me. And I think the reason for that is my disability overrules my femininity a lot of the time. So people don't necessarily see a woman. They don't react to me as a woman. They react to me as a disabled person. And so you get this really weird situation where obviously you believe women's rights are important. You very, I see myself as a woman very strongly, but others don't necessarily, and you don't necessarily have the same experiences. And that can sometimes make it quite challenging to engage in those conversations and to empathize truly with what able-bodied women are going through, because a lot of the time you just don't experience things the same way as them. So I always think it's very interesting to look at feminism and look at women's equality from those different perspectives and kind of try and understand where the common areas are and where actually there are differences.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. As disabled women, we have privileges that others may not have, so we are almost automatically exempt, especially for those who have visible disabilities. I don't think this so much applies to people who maybe have invisible disabilities, but certainly we're almost automatically exempt from some of the harsher ends of that everyday sexism that people face and women face. And on the flip side, we're faced with other harsher realities. So, getting reproductive checkups, getting cancer tests are really difficult for women in wheelchairs because they can't access a bench because there's no hoist, or they can't access the right radiography machinery because there's no hoist, and there's no staff with the training to deal with that. And I think that especially becomes more pertinent as people like me grow older, people like me who died when they were young and never reached that threshold. So I'm noticing a lot of that lately, and that's a really important area for me that needs to step up. So we experience maybe more difficulties in those areas, but when it comes to those harsher ends, those more spontaneous moments of barriers that are put in your way, we have them maybe from other areas, but we don't get the same result. And that's a definite privilege, and that's something that we need to use as some sort of way to speak out against it. Certainly for me, I wouldn't like to think any woman feels silenced by anything or anyone. It's a really, really, really important part of my identity, as much as my disability is. I don't think one outweighs the other. I've definitely had experiences where being a woman has overcome the disability, and that concerns me, that still happens. And I see a lot of parallels between ableism and sexism, and we need to look at them as a whole and hopefully learn from it. I read a blog yesterday from a young girl about bodily autonomy, And it's a discussion that comes up a lot in feminism and why that's important and why it's important that a woman can make her own choices. And she discussed something really simple, and it was about the length for her. And I'd never thought about it before, but she said that a lot of disabled women that she knew had really short hair just to make it easier for everybody else. And her mom asked her when she was very, very young if she could cut her hair, and she said no. And the battle went off for a while, and before eventually her mother just cut her hair short. And when she went to university, she grew her hair and has kept it long. But the fact is, she had the right to decide within boundaries, I suppose, as a child, but less boundaries as she grew older, that to have her hair whatever length she wanted, or whatever colour she wanted. And it's a really simple way of talking about autonomy. And I do think that, that's something we need to look at too, a disabled woman's right to choose how she dresses or how she looks. And, nothing else should really impact on that. And that's a big thing, and that goes from her colour right down to having kids to whatever else might be. It's a big topic area, and there's a lot of discussion that we all need to have. But I think we've seen a real surge since Donald Trump's election in terms of the women's rights movement. It's nice to see people standing up for what they believe in here. And I always say I only ever vote because of the women that died to give me my right to vote. So here's to them.
Yeah, in fact, just tying that in to what Zoe said and to what you said on like screenings for cancer and things like that, places often aren't accessible. These are things that we see as a result of women's rights movements, the continuation of women's rights. Is there perhaps sometimes a possibility of women's rights movements becoming a bit ableist if they are divisive and forgetting about the wide scope and variety of, how varying and different women are?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, if you look at the recent women's marches that happened all over the world, and there was one organised in London, or it was organised by the Women's Equality Party, and it was only after they were contacted specifically by a group of women's disability rights activists that they even considered how they might make that march accessible to people in wheelchairs and with other disabilities. Once that conversation had happened, they were, very responsive. They set up a special section of the march where people could, if people in wheelchairs wanted to, they could go, and they could be assisted, or they could have a buddy to make sure that they could get around okay. And they arranged to live stream the march so people could follow along at home if they weren't able to make it out. And they did all of these things, which were great. But it didn't occur to them until somebody with a disability went, hey, what about us? And it's not just women's rights movements that have these issues, right? I mean, we're very used to, as disabled people, kind of having to be a little bit pushy and having to say, look, we are here and we have these additional requirements and you need to make room for us. But it's always a little disheartening, certainly for me, because I would call myself a feminist, and it's sometimes disheartening to find, that you're forgotten as a group of people. You're not necessarily observed, you're not necessarily acknowledged. For a party that supposedly stands for all women and tries to encompass a really, really broad range and really, really broad spectrum of people. And they're doing a lot to try and encompass all races and to work with trans women and other LGBT groups, and that's great. But disability is still quite far off the edge of the radar, I think, a lot of the time. And I don't know why that is exactly, because it's not the case that they exclude all minority groups. It just seems like disability is the one that's furthest back on the shelf when they reach.
It's the forgotten minority. I think that's the problem. Disability, it's so much there now that they forget that it's a thing, and that we need to respond to it in some sort of positive way.
Well, I think, if I may, it is definitely like what you say. It's almost disability is so big, as well as the sexism stuff. So it's almost like there's this kind of feeling that you have to pick one or the other. Like disability is so big that, like you said, it's almost like feeling asexual because you're disabled first, or you feel like you're disabled first and a woman second. Is that?
Yeah, but sexism isn't just about sexuality. That's the point. There are still a lot of common areas where, as as a woman, I can identify with these movements. You know, I mean, think about, you know, potentially parenthood or things like the gender pay gap, all of these sort of bigger areas that, yes, my disability plays into them a little bit, but actually it's because of my gender that I would feel, you know, feel unequal in those areas. And so there are some situations, yes, where it's kind of disabled versus woman, but actually a lot of the time there are these common areas, and there should be space for disabled women, and there is space if we make the space. But it shouldn't be necessarily up to us all the time to be pushing and to be forcing ourselves into those spaces. It should be about having those spaces open that we can just kind of wheel ourselves in, you know.
I think the irony of it all is that as women, you know, those people, I suppose, directly behind the organisation of whatever type of demonstration it might be for whatever minority group, they're already exposed to the fact that they are a minority and they may have to be pushy themselves. So the fact that it's lead an intersection is quite ironic in some ways. I think we've come some way to things being more accessible, but we've a long way to go. I was lucky that in Northern Ireland, a lady called Chris Leisure had a virtual march as part of the main march in Belfast for people with disabilities who couldn't make it out. And I thought that was a really unique way of still being able to participate, even though we couldn't be there physically. And I think things like that should be rolled out wider. You know, it's one small change, and she did that because she knew firsthand what it was like to not be able to go somewhere in person. There's a lot about political campaigning or rights campaigning that is very inaccessible. It does require you to be places and to go places, and that can be difficult for people, especially when the public transport network this isn't necessarily up to speed. You know, so we need to find creative ways around that until we can get the infrastructure where we need it to be. And I think there's been some progress to making that more inclusive, but there's much more that we can do.
Yeah, no, definitely. Wow. A wonderful episode. Some really insightful stuff there. Thank you all for joining us. Zoe, do you want to lead us out with a final conclusion?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think feminism is great. And I think the fact that we have International Women's Day and it receives so much support in media and just popular support is a really encouraging thing. I think sometimes sort of the nature of feminist discourse and the arguments that are made and the campaigns that are run can be a little narrow in terms of their inclusivity for women with disabilities. And I think, you know, I believe women with disabilities have a very positive contribution that can be made to feminism. And I think a lot of the issues that we as disabled people have actually translate very well to the feminist movement. So I think it's really important that we make our voices heard. And I really hope that as time goes on and as the feminist movement hopefully becomes the norm, then there will be more space and more discourse around the sort of minorities within feminism and the different experiences that we have and the different challenges, but also opportunities that we can bring to the table.
Wonderful. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.